Hey, everybody. Welcome to Awaken Relationships. And I am Julie Murphy, and I have written a book called Awaken Your Wealth. And many of us don't realize that what happens is that the money and the wealth that we have in our life is actually the result, because money is energy, of what's going on in your personal life, your family life, and your work life, that all then results into your financial life. And so I have started this awakening series. And today we are talking about awaken your relationships, because we can only bring in those relationships that are vibrationally at the same level as where you are. And if you don't want to repeat your past and you want to create the desired future, there are things that internally you need to shift, that it's not always about everybody else. And this is why Rita is here. Rita, please tell everybody about yourself.
Hi. I am a body-mind expert, and I use all that really great information about how we work to help women break out of narcissistic and toxic relationships. So many of the women that I work with are, they've lived life already. They've had life experiences. They aren't kids anymore. They've been around the block, and they're ready to move forward to learn different patterns and habits. Usually their kids are a little bit older, or they've had some sort of life change. A lot of women getting help during this pandemic because they're realizing just how toxic of a situation that they're in. And people really confuse. They don't realize how powerful emotional abuse is, and how painful and difficult that is on our psyche and on our kids. And so we tolerate a lot more than we really should. And that there are ways and skills and support and tools that you can adopt that will keep you from falling back into those patterns of any sort of abuse or reaction that you have when a narcissist gets scary.
Yeah, it does get scary. And, it's interesting that, so often I've witnessed that, there's nothing really done in our society or our system of the emotional and the mental and the verbal abusive parts. It's really, it's the court system and everything else really goes after the physical abuse, because that's the more severe one that is visible. But I have witnessed that the verbal, mental, and emotional really takes a deeper toll. The physical, it almost feels like, to me, very similar to where the physical abuse, I mean, definitely not good, right? But that's almost after the emotional and the mental and the verbal has occurred. It's like that's when it's escalated to the nth degree. And there's so many other things that predicate that. And I watch it when I sit with clients, and you can witness one of the partners in a relationship that is more domineering, that try to speak for the other person and poo-poo their ideas and completely try to disempower the other person. And the other person plays the role of choosing to be disempowered, because I definitely think there's a two-way street here. It's not just one of the parties. And I witness that all the time. And, we're not really taught that, how do we from a very young age start to stand in a place of empowerment as opposed to accommodate. I've really, noticed through the years that, I was raised Catholic, and you were just supposed to shut up and put up, like you were just supposed to mute yourself, because that created turmoil, and you didn't want to create turmoil. You wanted to be a lady. And, and I've really encouraged people through the years, and even my own children, in the fact that it's important to have your voice. It's important to, like, you don't have to be a jerk about it, but it's, state your truth and do it in the most loving and compassionate way that you possibly can. Otherwise it chips away at you over the years. You continue to be disempowered if you choose to not stand in your power.
But you know what gets in the way a lot with almost everybody is past trauma. And you know, when
Mhm.
I first heard the word trauma, and I'm a survivor of sex abuse, and I didn't think I had trauma. And when I first heard the word, you know, it was like, oh, trauma. That's, you know, that's something that happens in war-torn countries or
Right.
PTSD. And until I learned a more accurate definition of trauma, which is when something happens to you that's unexpected, that you don't feel you have control over, and that you don't have a chance to process through. And
Mm.
what happens is when an experience like that happens to us, it's unexpected, we feel helpless to it, and we don't have a safe place or way to process through it. Our body puts a bookmark in our brain and says, you know what? We need to come back to this. And so, literally, physically, it creates a neural receptor, a bookmark in your book of life. And then
Mm.
every time something reminds you of that bookmark, you automatically go back to that chapter in the book. And if you react the same way you've always reacted, then you still won't learn what you need to learn, which is that you're not a helpless child anymore. You do have resources available to you. You are an adult. Your brain is now more fully functioning. These are the lessons that you learn that you're supposed to learn when you go back to these chapters in the book. But when we keep coming from a place of fear because we don't know how to calm ourselves down or don't give ourselves permission to calm down, then we just keep repeating that same, going back to that same bookmark, but skipping the chapter and saying, this is too scary. When I was a kid, if I came across a scary part in the book, I would literally skip over the chapter. And
Mm.
sometimes I'd go to the end of the book to make sure it turned out okay, because I couldn't handle the drama. And this
Right.
is the same sort of thing that happens when we start taking the judgmentalism out of it, when we
Mhm.
stop saying, you know, this is good or bad, and we just say, oh, this is something that I am supposed to look at, and I need to learn something around about how I'm an adult and that how I have power and I have a voice. When we look at it as a problem to be solved, it's a lot easier for people to solve the problem. But if we look at it as from a more painful emotional place, it means that we still haven't gone back and read that chapter,
Mm.
and that we need to learn that we aren't helpless, we aren't powerless, we have a voice, we are strong, but we have to realize that, and we have to be present with ourselves when we go through, when we remember those experiences.
Well, and you know,
Was
as
that
you were,
too monologue?
no, no, not at all. I mean, to me, you know, one of the
Good.
things that I realized, you know, I'm always the one to poke the bear on people's emotional stuff. And you know, through the years, you know, some people will say to me, well, Julie, you know, you sound like a therapist or a counselor, or, and I'm like, yeah, because, you know, to get people to where they want to be in their lives, which our society uses money as that medium to do that. And you know, as an example, I actually posted on my personal Facebook page um, this article. One of my other clients is a physician, a doctor, and it was a really great article on mask wearing through this pandemic. And there's lots of controversy about the masks, right? And my post was, you know what? Hey, um, this is someone who's a physician, and it's an interesting article on masks. And I put on there that, you know, from the beginning, I personally have questioned, is it good or is it bad? You know, and there's enough support out there for either argument, whatever it is. And but my point was is to people was, watch how you're triggered, because this is a topic that is triggering people's past traumas, like the lashing out at other people because it's their fear and it's their trauma. And I've even had people personally send me emails going, you're better than this, Julie. You need to take that article down. And I'm like going, this is a about a trigger that you have. Like, because I always, I've learned in all the work that I've done through the years and my research on people's emotions that if you're triggered about somebody else's behavior or post or whatever, that means this is your opportunity to shift something within you. And in my journey to getting more alignment with who I am and what my soul's here to do, I've had to look at some of these triggers because I'm a very strong personality. And I too, just like everyone else, thought it was about everybody else. And I've come to learn now that I'm on the other side, it is everything to do with you as the person if you are triggered. And I also saw some really interesting patterning that it was people who tend to be more people who like to control all of the bits and pieces in their life, which you've taught me that that's one of the stress response systems, right? Mm-hmm. That you try to control it and you try to make it perfect and try to get order. And you know what? Anyone would tell you that I am a perfectionist like that. That has certainly been one of my stress responses through the years. And so it's just really interesting to me that we are all being pressed these days. And we have people that I truly believe that we have called into our lives to play these roles to help our souls evolve to this next place, whether it's to heal your trauma or to, get you to stand in your place of empowerment. And that's a way that you're doing it. But what I'm really trying to help foster is safe and loving communication around it all, because when you shine the light on your own personal trauma, which, like for me as an example, I did not remember until I did a hypnotherapy session that, and it wasn't just one session, I was working on stuff for years, that I had then remembered that I was sexually molested by a Catholic priest when I was 4 or 5 years old. And I didn't even remember it. And many people may not have as extreme of a trauma, but all this sexual abuse stuff is coming up for a reason collectively around the world, and I don't think we've heard the last of it. And so it's time for us really all to heal in whatever version that's coming out for you. And that's really like what's motivated me to have these conversations, to open up the dialogue, because when it comes to sex and money, we don't talk about it. And it's time to talk about it. God gave me the gift to gab, so I'm going to do it. And I realized, wow, for years I have stayed mute because I wanted to be the polite girl. I didn't want to rock waters. I didn't want the conflict. And now it's like, you know what? I'm here to actually rock the boat a little bit so that people can heal, because I was given this personality for a reason. And so I know that that's, one of the steps that I work clients through is, you have to get back in tune with your authentic self and wake yourself back up again. And you can only do that if you really, truly understand that you are perfect in the version that you are, as opposed to all these other naysayers who have told you that that's not okay.
Well, what happens is people don't recognize that they're in a stress response, and they don't know what to do about it when they do recognize it.
So how can they recognize it?
One of the ways to recognize it is to know what the 5 different stress patterns are, and to recognize them in yourself, and to recognize when you're doing any of them. Right. So a healthy pattern is one where you feel integrated and whole and connected to the earth and insightful and problem solving and in a flow of some sort. And for people who are high level athletes or musicians or have achieved a high level in their field, they're very comfortable and spend most of their time in a state of flow. Now, the rest of us, we get overwhelmed and we didn't learn how to be in that flow. Instead, we learned how to be in a place of fear and trauma and stress. And so we identify ourselves as our personality as one of these stress patterns. But in reality, the person that we want to be is the person we are when we're not stressed.
Right.
And so we think there's something wrong with us all the time because we keep exhibiting these stress patterns instead of recognizing that we are under stress. We've fallen into this mental state of fight or flight, and to interrupt the pattern, to do a pattern
Right.
interrupt.
Right.
But most of us are so attached to our stress response, thinking that that is the answer, and it feels like it's the answer. It feels like the answer right now is to yell at you and minimize you and tell you that you're nothing in order
Yeah.
to protect myself. Or it feels
Yeah,
like
I
the
get
right
that.
thing to do right now is to just put your blinders on and put your nose down and get to work. And that seems like the answer. Or maybe to have things very rigid and specific. I was just watching Helen Mirren with Queen Elizabeth, her portrayal of Queen Elizabeth, and how there's this need for rigid lines and geometry. So maybe we think the answer is to just control everything by getting everything in its place, that OCD. Or maybe we think the answer is to go to spirituality, and I'm just going to have more spiritual experiences with God and pretend like none of this other stuff is
I have
happening.
definitely witnessed a bunch of that.
Yes,
I think
yes,
that
that's
we've arrived on the,
disassociation.
yeah, right. And all we're doing is
Mm-hmm.
taking these control pieces or rigidity pieces into the spirituality realm, whereas before it was in
Yes.
the not, it was more in a secular world.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
It's the same
really interesting.
thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's called a spiritual bypass. And that's why there's so many predators and hypocrites who are in higher spiritual positions, because they never dealt with the emotional piece. They just went immediately to, the names of all the angels. And they didn't have their human experience. They just kept being in stress and disassociating. They just kept
Mhm.
disassociating from themselves and calling it a spiritual experience.
Right.
But in reality, it was disassociation. And then the last one, which is my favorite, is we will entrain to someone else, and we will look for ways to control them, to control their nervous system. Maybe people please. Maybe, can I get you a sandwich? Can I get you a drink of water? Would you like to sit down? Do you need a blanket?
Mhm.
Trying to control somebody else by people
Right.
pleasing them,
Well, and I've
by
even noticed
attaching to
that.
their nervous system.
So that is certainly one that I have used over the years, and I've noticed that in my own healing and recovery process, that when I don't people please, how uncomfortable I am. When I don't try to fix
Mm-hmm.
it, when I don't try to people please, it's like it actually makes me very uncomfortable because
Yeah,
I'm not.
that's your stress response to it.
Right. And so the way I interpret that, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but that I'm actually feeling the feelings of what's actually the reality of what's going on in my world, because I'm not fixing it and I'm not people pleasing it. Like, I'm actually sitting with what actually is reality. And it's like, okay, and then you choose to to continue to engage or continue not to engage, because I'm actually feeling the feelings of what is reality, and then trying to figure out then what's in alignment with my heart and my soul, and just being like, it's not in alignment. So, okay, like, I'm okay with not fixing this. And if this person walks away from me, I'm okay with that. Or, and yet, um, what I'm also surprised about is the fact that when I choose to not people please and not fix it, and this is whether it's employee relationships or love relationships or sibling relationships, because relationships, you show up who you are the same way in all those places. It doesn't change. That the minute I stop to people please and the minute I stop to fix, those relationships that are truly authentic and they truly care about me, they don't care that I didn't fix it. They don't care that I didn't people please. and they're still standing there right next to me. But my fear was always that they would walk away, which is why I always try to fix it and people please it, which
So
I
they
find
wouldn't walk away.
right. And so again, yet again, going back to the fact of we are the ones who are creating our realities, and we start to recognize that we've created from our trauma place as opposed to from a place of wholeness the reality that we are living. And there's such greater things on the other side of this, and I just want to share that with everybody, because sometimes it feels like an uphill battle, and wow, the magnificence on the other side is like truly amazing. And it's a journey. You get better at it. It's just like how I always talk about with people with money. Like, if you haven't been good at not recreating debt cycles and people taking advantage of you because you're a big giver, well, guess what? You know, that's building a muscle. And this part of the relationship piece is also building a muscle, because you've operated for so many years in a different package. And you're changing the packaging, you know, because you're going to then respond to the world from a place of wholeness as opposed to your trauma.
So you set up a perfect healing experience for yourself by getting yourself triggered, but purposely creating a situation that was safe. So you could test it out. You could test the electrical fence. Am I really safe or not? Now that can be a very dramatic sort of experience, because it's like watching a horror movie. How is this going to turn out? Oh my God. And the terror that you feel, the discomfort that you feel by not people pleasing, reminds you of a time when you didn't consciously people please and things went all wrong. But in reality, every time you people pleased, things didn't go right. It never went right. You just thought that you were in control of it in some way.
Totally.
So when we realize that we're in a stress response, like when we have that terror, like, oh shit, I want to people please, that's you being triggered. And you actually don't have to set up a drama for yourself to figure out that people are there. You can just recognize that you're triggered and go for a walk. And you get a lot of the same insights without having to recreate it in your external world.
Right.
So instead of testing the people around you, is this safe? Is this not safe? Is this safe? Is it not safe? Recognize the fact that you're asking those questions, even on a subconscious level, means that you're in a stress response. And if you're in a stress response, you're in the wrong part of your brain. You're not in the correct part of your brain. And so the first thing you always need to do is to get into the correct part of your brain. And so we can, and trust me, this is a very painful way to do it. We can keep recreating the dramas and then seeing if it's really the same thing. But it means that we're going back and recreating those same terrors that we felt when we were originally traumatized. That's hard. You don't have to do it that way. You can recognize when you're being triggered, use one of your tools to flip your switch into the correct part of your brain, and that deals with the trauma instead of reliving it over and over and over, which takes lifetimes and is extremely painful because you're constantly recreating your old traumas. It sucks.
Yeah. It's definitely not, doesn't make you happy, and it doesn't get you to the place that you desire.
No, it doesn't. And it's okay, and it's painful.
Right.
And when you're ready to put down some of that pain and realize that you don't have to go that route.
Right.
You know, people, self-care is one of those big buzzwords, but there's so much judgmentalism around it. To me, a big part of self-care is integration. So anytime you get new information, anytime you get triggered by something, it means you need to take a bath, or you need to go for a walk, or you need to hug a tree, or you need to listen to some good music, or you need to do your havening or trauma points. It means you have to do something in order to process through what just happened, because if you don't do that self-care, then the next time it comes around, you're going to get the same result. But if you stop and do the self-care when you get new information or when you're triggered, then you will not repeat the same thing in the future because you took the time to get the information to integrate it. But women have been taught that feminine things like that darkness, like that processing, the integration,
Right.
that those are pampering, and that's a spa, and that's, you're being narcissistic and selfish. In
Yeah,
reality,
that's so
it's the
true.
missing piece. That's the integration that you never gave yourself. And when you give it to yourself now, you won't keep recreating your money patterns, your relationship patterns, because you're finally reading the chapter of the book. You're not skipping over it.
Right. And it does, I always say you work things out or you act it out. And you do it through your money, your health, and or your relationships. And so it's about really changing that cycle. And, and I've learned, and I think it's important for people to recognize that when you've come from this place of trauma through the years, you actually don't even necessarily know what your heart really wants. That has been another thing on this journey that I have been on through the years, that wow, when you people please and you have this whole stress response system, you don't necessarily know what's really true for you, because when you come out of that place, you kind of go, oh, if I come from a place of wholeness, what is my heart desires? Because I've heard over and over again in many of my teachers over the years that do you and the universe takes care of the rest. Do you and the universe takes care of the rest. But when you don't know how to do you from a non-trauma place,
right. And you don't know how to get out of the non-trauma place.
Right. Because
and
you
the
think
thing
you're
that
going
you
to
do,
the
everybody
next
makes fun of you. Yeah.
Right. Well, because
And
people
your
want to
process,
stay,
people ridicule.
yeah, because people want you to stay the way that you were because that was great for them. But it wasn't necessarily great for you. And it is amazing on how many people, I call it in my first book, The Emotion Behind Money, I talk about crabs in a bucket. That if you put 10 crabs in a bucket and one crab tries to climb out, the other 9 crabs will pull that crab right back down to the bucket. None of the crabs can get out of the bucket. But if you put one crab into that bucket, it can crawl out of that bucket no problem. And that's what happens when we decide to start to come from more of a place of wholeness and not come from a place of this trauma place. Then what happens is you got a bunch of crabs in your bucket in your life because they liked you showing up the other way. And because one of the things to recognize is those other crabs are also interfacing with you. You're coming from your trauma place, they're coming from their trauma place. And it's all a bunch of trauma as opposed to a bunch of wholeness. And this is what I have learned, that as I've shifted out of my trauma, people have either shifted out of my life, because they are still choosing to operate from that place of trauma, or they are shifting with me and evolving more and more from a place of wholeness every day that goes by. And I just think that's important for people to recognize that it's actually okay. It's really okay for people to walk out of your life and for people to, or not even necessarily walk out. It doesn't have to even be that dramatic, or just like, I just don't really have as much in common. And I really want to just have it be happy and healthy. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that you care any less about them. It's just that it's the next phase of your journey, and we go through these phases, and that it's okay. And this is where I think people's limiting beliefs come into play, because we feel like, oh, especially, I grew up in the South Side of Chicago, and I've lived in Chicago my whole life, except for when I went to college. And the Midwest is pretty loyal and conservative, like comparatively speaking. And it's almost like you have this guilt that's put in this place if you move on, or if you move to the next phase, or if you move to and we have to release that, like that recognize that too is coming from a trauma place. That, I always say that to move to the next place, you have to remove all the shame, blame, guilt, and judgment that you have, because that is usually being fueled by some belief system that you have, that you either were, it was created from your childhood, or the communities that you grew up in, these belief systems that we take with us. And it's okay to challenge those and just decide, that maybe that was true for me for years, but maybe it's not so true for me today, and just be okay with that. And these are some of the things that, as you start to shift to this place of being more whole, this is what starts to come into alignment, that you challenge your belief systems, you get in tuned with what's going on in your heart, and allow it to evolve. Because when it's almost like, I think money tends to be an easier one for people to see than almost in relationships, because money is outside of ourselves. And, so if you keep recreating these debt cycles over and over again, there is a level, like, people are like, oh God, I could just never get out of this $10,000 of credit card debt. Like, my credit card debt just always sits around 10 grand. Well, that's a belief system. And it's like, once you free that up, that's when it's really important. Like, let's just say that payment was like $300 a month, as an example. When you free that up, I'm always telling clients that I want you now to take that and have that $300 a month fund the intentions of what you want to create. Because in relationships, we recreate suffering cycles from our trauma place. Well, when it comes to money, our suffering place is recreating debt all the time. That's your financial suffering cycle. And I don't care if it's mortgage debt, student loan debt, credit card debt, car debt. One of the best stories I always love to tell, that's an easy one for people to maybe absorb here, is the fact that when you pay off your car or you pay off your student loan, have your student loan payments that you were paying now go into your own kids' college fund so that you can break the cycle. If you desire to pay for your kids' college, or when you're done paying off your car payment, create one of those online savings accounts where you can name your financial intention and say, this is my new car fund. I had one client, and I love this story. She had a Honda Accord, and she like, Jewel, it's got like 279,000 miles on it, and I'm an attorney, and I need to go and buy a car. And she had been doing this car fund for years, and she's like, but I only have 9 grand. I'm like, well, you can take that 9 grand and you can go have that as a down payment. Now your payment is less than what you're putting into your savings account. So let's just say your payment's $300 a month and you still have an extra 150 because you were putting 450 a month into the savings account. Take that 150 and keep putting in the savings account, and the 350 is going for payment. Then your next car, you won't have a car payment. You know what she did? She turned around and she took the $9,000 and she got the best car she could. And she decided to get another Honda Accord because it lasted so long. She's like, oh my gosh, I was able with 9 grand to buy a Honda Accord with 100,000 miles on it, but I'll get like 200,000 miles out of this, and I still have money building up in my cash account. So she actually keeps doing it. But again, like, that's a way you come from a place of empowerment with money, and that's almost an easy one for people to see. This relationship stuff, wow, it's deep. It's deep. Money is almost easier than the relationship stuff, because the relationship stuff takes, having to look in the mirror and really go, what was my part in all of this? Even when you're sitting here participating in a relationship that isn't serving your highest and best, because whether there's emotional, mental, physical, abuse going on in there. It's not easy.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's why I like to take a lot of the emotionality out of change and transformation, because we have so many traumas in our system that to take the time to process through every single one of them, I mean, it takes forever. When we get anxious or upset or judgmental or guilty, all of that, we've just been triggered. Whenever we're not in our centered, confident, comfortable place, it means that we're triggered. And we can create all sorts of stories around what the trigger means or what we should do about it. We can spend a lot of time in our head, and that's why people feel
Oh,
crazy in their heads, because they're trying to answer this problem. When in reality, you just need to do a pattern interrupt.
right,
So you have to do some sort of self-care. You don't have to go into the story. You don't have to figure it out. To do that, people spend decades in therapy trying to figure out why they have mommy issues or why they have daddy issues. And that those are just stories we're making up for ourselves about what it all means. The easiest thing to do is to recognize when you're triggered, do something to flip the switch in your brain, and the answer will appear to you. You will be able to make those changes. You'll be able to do something different because you're not coming from a place of fear. If you
right,
are anything but centered, confident, calm, you feeling in control of yourself,
right,
um, any other state is you're reacting, and you really only need to recognize it and do something about it.
right.
If you take all that time trying to figure out why you did or where it come from or whose fault it is or how you stop them or what they're thinking, you're really just
None
spending
of
your
it matters.
time. It doesn't matter. It
Yeah,
doesn't
the
matter.
whys don't matter anymore. This is the insanity of our brain,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And it's just like, you know what? I can, and trust me, I'm a thinker. I'm an absolute big thinker. and and I have found
Mm-hmm.
going, yeah, maybe I shouldn't do that because that makes me think more about it. And I need to just drop into my heart and be like, I don't really know. I just know I want something that it makes me feel like I'm, the queen of the castle and I feel like $1,000,000 because I know I deserve it. And I know I deserve to be treated that way and loved that way. And there's anything that doesn't support that just has to go. Just
Mm-hmm.
has to
And
go.
you have to start treating yourself that way. The
Right.
reason you're not being treated like a queen is because you're not treating yourself like a queen.
Mm,
If you were David Bowie, you'd be going all around, the world being a rock star when you don't have a dime to your name. Because in
right.
order to be a rock star, you have to behave like a rock star. And in order to, feel like a queen, you have to treat yourself like a queen. You have to treat yourself as if you respect your feelings, as if your feelings matter, as if those traumas, you value them and you care enough about them to let them go,
Right.
to integrate the parts of yourself.
Well, and
So
I don't think people realize that that is such a big piece of the equation because
huge. It's
it,
probably the biggest.
right. So I really want to really drill this home for people because um you have to believe it, feel it, act it. I always say that, your thoughts, your words, and your feelings are all the vibration that you put out into the world. And wherever you're vibrating in that capacity, that's what you're going to attract to yourself. So if you are treating yourself to a queen as a queen, so for example, like I right before I came here on vacation with my kids, I actually was really there's a place in Chicago called 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. And over the last
Oh, that is my
I know,
favorite place in the whole universe. I'm so
I know.
sad.
So it was closed with the pandemic. And I was just like, oh man. Like, so one of the things that
Mm-hmm.
I would do to treat myself like a queen was I would drop the kids off at their dad's house. And this place was only a few miles away. And I was like, and I would just spend the whole
The
Saturday
whole
afternoon
day,
there. And then I'd like
whole
leave at
day.
like midnight. And it's like
Yes.
you get body scrubs and massages, and you sit in these sauna rooms in the cold room and you eat the healthy food. And
Yes.
by the time
It's
you leave,
nirvana.
you feel like $1,000,000.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, so much of it is like treating myself like a queen is like the physical side, But that could even be as easy as like, I love to walk out in nature, like just love it. Like there's something about nature that grounds me. And, because all that stuff is, you know, I've struggled with my weight my whole life up to this point. And I realized it's like because I wasn't treating my body like I was a queen. And now I see food so differently. This year I'm down like 40 pounds from where I was at the beginning of the year because I actually had a paradigm shift in terms of I actually don't want to feel the way I feel after I eat or drink those things. And people are like, what do you mean you don't want cheese and wine? And I'm like, I know. I just like am sitting in a place going, I don't want to feel like that tomorrow. Like, because now I'm going, wow, because foods are vibrational. And it's like, okay, self-love, self-care, like bring in the foods that make me feel like $1,000,000. And people will be like, well, and it's funny, like, it's not necessarily even foods that you would think, like, if I eat tomatoes do not like my body, neither do peppers, and it's like, so there's all kinds of ways of how you treat yourself like a queen or a king of your castle.
Like you matter. Yes.
Yeah.
Like you matter. Like your feelings matter. What you want matters.
Yes. It's so true. And then that's really a lot
and
of
when
what,
you treat yourself that way, other people start treating you that way too. When you say, no, this is what I need to stay healthy for me, people don't have an argument.
Right. And when it comes to so much of with relationships, that if you're not doing those things for yourself, right? If you're not doing those things that are in alignment with you, then how can you show up in a relationship? Right? Because I mean, you can, but you're going to show up and not from a place from wholeness,
But most women, they haven't had that feeling of wholeness. I never had that experience of wholeness until I finally things started to come together for me. But if we're born into a family that is disordered, then we never felt wholeness. And there are all these parts and pieces that still need to be integrated. And the way we integrate them is by taking the time to go to the King Spa, or by taking the time to go for a walk in nature, because the vibration of the earth is very grounding. It's very calming for the nervous system and allows things to open up. You want things, you need to feel safe enough and relaxed enough to process through your life experiences. Right. That's why the most successful people say they meditate an hour, 2 hours every day, because that's where their genius comes from, that processing time. And so when you don't treat yourself like the miracle it really is, you can't break out of the cycle, because you never tie things off. You never process through the information. And so you have to have habits that give you that processing time. Otherwise, you'll always feel like you're, a day late and a dollar short.
Right. That's so true. And no one ever wants to have that feeling of feeling like you're a day late and a dollar short.
But that's how most of us live our lives. That's how we got into debt cycles in the first place.
Yeah, it's really interesting that I had this conversation with somebody the other day in terms of, in my book, I talk about clean up your past, which are your debts, while living in the present moment and planning for the future simultaneously at the same time. And I've always recommended to people that you have to put those debt payments from a financial perspective on autopilot, so you stop giving them energy. Meaning that if your payments, if you come up with a game plan to get it all taken care of and your payments are $300 a month, then you have that automatically just draw to your checking account. You don't even think about it. You don't even, so for me, as an example, that's my alimony payments that I pay. That is a pain point for me. And I don't want to focus on my past at all. So I have that just going on autopilot. Like, I don't have to do anything, and it just automatically shifts out of my checking account. So debt works that way for me. It's my alimony payments. And at some juncture, those payments will be zeroed out. And then, because if you don't put the past stuff like out of sight, out of mind, because the conversation I was having with this person the other day, it's like, don't have to fix it. You don't have to change it. You just have to go, what's good for me right now, here in the present moment, that's going to plant the seeds for the future that I want to create. Because if you keep focusing on the past and you keep worrying about it and thinking about it and trying to fix it and trying to create new patterns, like, no, don't try to fix the patterns. Don't try to do any of that. Just do what's right now. Again, put that stuff on autopilot, but do what's healthy for you here and now, because that is the next right step. And you're focusing on what it is that you want to create in your life. And again, this is all going back to, if you're in your monkey brain, you're just going to stay on the treadmill and you're never going to get off the treadmill. We have to drop into our hearts. I must be shifting because one of my teachers always told me every time you want to yawn, you're shifting.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's your nervous system regulating itself.
Yeah.
That's what it is. When you yawn, it means your nervous system is releasing energy off of it, which is much easier than worrying, fighting, drinking, doing drugs. It's much easier to be honest with yourself. And so you, for people, are the first half of their transformation. You're the part where they get new information. And then you need to prescribe to them that they take time and integrate that information. Most people, what happens is the fear stops them, the anxiety stops them, an old wound, that bookmark stops them cold. So you have to deal with the bookmark by going for a walk or hugging a tree or doing yoga, and the bookmark, or whatever you do.
Past trauma.
Is your past trauma, which you have no control over, which it will trigger without you wanting it to or not. But when it does trigger, when we do get new information, we have to purposely give ourselves time to integrate it. Otherwise, we'll stay trapped with an encyclopedic knowledge of our daddy issues without ever being able to move forward, and then thinking we're failures because of it. It's because we haven't taken the time to integrate and process the information that we get from people like you and me. So you'll probably feel like you're hitting your head up against a wall when you talk to people because you're talking to their trauma. But that's key. That's beautiful. That's awesome. You're like, aha, this came up, which means that now's the right time for you to do that thing that you do that makes you feel good. And then it'll all make sense and come together.
Well, and it's interrupting those cycles, which is why, like, again, money seems to be an easier thing for people, where that's why those payments have to be on autopilot, because then you're interrupting the cycle and then you're focusing really just on what you want to create moving forward.
You're reclaiming your energy to direct it where you want it to go, instead of it being hijacked by the past and by people who want to manipulate you using your past.
Right. And there's lots of opportunities for that out there. So a lot of people will realize, I think one of the biggest things that I learned in my divorce process is that I thought, oh God, the divorce is over. Finally, I got through it. It's done. Oh, it just started once the divorce got over. Because it just didn't change that day. It didn't. There was all the stuff that I couldn't figure out how to do in the marriage came after the marriage ended. And that's when the real work, I mean, you're choosing to flip a switch in your life by saying, okay, tried to work it out, tried to figure it out, tried to do something different. This isn't happening here, so I need to move to the next place. But then you have to now interface in the world to get to the next place. And that's a balancing act for many. And
that's when you get a good coach. You get somebody who's been there before, done it before, who can give you advice, hold the space for you, and make it so much easier. We are addicted to our suffering, sadly.
So speaking of that, many people, Rita has been my coach, everybody, through my process. And how do people get a hold of you, Rita? How do people, because you have been a gem in my world, and you have absolutely helped me get to this next place, which is why I wanted to share my little gem with the world.
Well, thank you. I'm honored. Well,
I watched your Facebook lives for about a year. I was like stalking you on Facebook going, she's talking about exactly what I'm living, and oh my God. And it was like, so I want people to know, how do they find you? How do they interface with you? Because you are a gift for any person who is in relationship that is not serving them well. And ladies, and it could be a gentleman too, you know it. You know when it's not in alignment with your heart. And so how do people find you?
well, the reason people resonate with me is because what I'm bringing to the table is the latest body mind science, the latest cutting edge tools for these things. And so they can find me at my website, 𝑘𝐮𝐵 and you'll see it's fairly integrative. It's coaching that I do that includes acupressure and energy work. And so it's a very integrative we work on a lot of different parts of you at the same time when people coach with me. So 𝑘𝐮𝐵, and then within a couple weeks, I'm going to have another website. It'll be �ＲitaHickmanCoaching.com. You can find me on Facebook. Just look up Rita 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, and you'll see that I've got a couple different pages you might want to belong to, or send me a friend request, and I'll accept those. And then you can follow my daily live streams that I do Monday through Friday. And for women who, like you, who need some support but don't want to announce to the world that that they're struggling, they're not ready yet, these live streams can really sustain people to get them to a healthier place.
Well, and it just might be the thing that, for me, traditional therapists were not, that was not where I was finding assistance, because I'm going, this is so much deeper than this. You're not getting it. And then it was like, and I was doing like other body work, but I really think the point here to people is that you've integrated so many different components, and you're unique in that. And which is why I think it's so important for people to check it out, because I've done a lot of different modalities of healing. I've been on this journey since 2005, when I went to my first Deepak Chopra event, and did energy healing before that. And you've really integrated a lot of these tools from the Western world and the Eastern world, and how it then affects our physical bodies. So any of you that are out there that need that, check Rita out. I can't stress that enough, because you deserve it, and you deserve to love yourself up and above everything and anything else. And if there's other tips and tools that you need in your world, outside of the relationship component, join me on any of my other awakening series. On Monday nights, we have Awaken Your Health at 8 p.m. Central. And then I also am going to, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be announcing Awakening Your Spirit, and doing some stuff to help people align with their soul and soul activation of being your unique self. And all of those things are on juliemurphy.com. So come check me out, and you can get alerted to when things are happening. So thank you, Rita, yet again. And everyone, join us again next Thursday, 9 a.m. Central. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
You're welcome.
Bye, guys.